everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. And I think for some people it's really late at night. So I welcome you all to this summit and really want to thank the students for their amazing comments and thoughts and reflections and for allowing us to learn from you. We're so grateful and looking forward to having the Reactor Panel react to all the great points that you made. So I'm going to ask Professor Fleming and Dr. Olsen and Professor Yamin and Banda to open their cameras. I'm going to do a very short introduction because we have, this time is going to fly. There's a lot to react to. And we have a hard stop at 11:50 my time when Dr. Perman, the Chancellor of the University of Maryland system, will come on to close the summit, which has been so wonderfully successful so far. And hello, Professor Banda in Malawi, thank you for joining. It's great to see everyone. So just with some quick introductions, starting with you, Professor Shani Fleming, who is an associate professor at the University of Maryland, Baltimore Graduate School. She's an executive team member of the Physician Assistant Leadership and Learning Academy, PALA, and although I understand it might be the Physician Associate Leadership and Learning Academy, and the Graduate School's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Officer. Thank you so much for joining. Dr. Jody Olsen, hi Jody, recently served as the 20th Director of the Peace Corps, overseeing among other wonderful things, overseeing the difficult return of 7,000 volunteers at the start of the pandemic, who are now slowly making their way back. And of course, many on this session will recognize her as the beloved visiting professor at the University of Maryland School of Social Work and the founding director of the UMB Center for Global Engagement, which is sponsoring this summit, one of the sponsors of the summit. Chikosa Banda, an old friend, is the Dean of the Chancellor College Faculty of Law in Malawi and a senior lecturer at our own University of Maryland Carey School of Law. And he's the co-directs the teaching partnership between the two schools that you heard about in the previous panel. And finally, my old friend, Alicia Yamin, thank you for joining. Alicia is a lecturer on law and a senior fellow at the Petrie-Flom Center for Health, Law, Policy, Biotechnology, and Bioethics at Harvard Law School, and senior advisor on human rights at Partners in Health. And there are much more extensive bios for these wonderful reactors on the Summit webpage. So I just wanted to share their short titles. So it's great to have all of you here. There was a lot that you just heard, much to react to from the students from medicine and physician assistant, public health, social work, and law. So I guess I'll start with you, Alicia, if you don't mind being the first to react. This is a summit that's quite different in the sense that we're hearing from students. So though you were all experts in your field, we're centering students in this. And did any story or reflection stand out to you and relate to your practice as a lawyer and public health expert? What reflections stood out to you the most and why?
Well, first of all, thank you, Virginia, for inviting me to be part of this. And it was really a great pleasure to listen to the students' reflections earlier today. It's really just a wonderful initiative and wonderful event. I wanted to give a couple of reactions. I do teach at Harvard Law School. I also teach in the bioethics program at the medical school and at the School of Public Health. And I've lived for half my life in South America and East Africa. So from a little bit on two comments, one from Teuka, and I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name too badly, on laws, and then another from Rose on health and health systems in Kenya. So from the law comment I thought was really, it was really very articulate and important, the comment she made. And Malawi has been a center of external engagement in drafting of laws. I am very aware of two countervailing tendencies on abortion law reform and movements. And I think the point she made about owning your own constitution and creating your own framework for democracy, really. That's what constitutions do. They design democracies, they set out our fundamental commitments. And the extent to which that is affected or distorted by external actors, I think is something that has gone on for a very long time, obviously, and there's a tremendous legacy of colonialism in many countries' legal frameworks. But it's something that we don't talk about enough when we teach in law school, in terms of theories of law and what that means and constitutional reform moments and processes. So that was really, really kind of hit home and resonated with a lot of things that I've worked on in my life, including constitutional reform in Kenya and the implementation of the wonderful constitution in that country, as well as now in Chile in South America. On public health, I really thought what Rose said was, again, very kind of striking and absolutely true about the amount of donor engagement and funding to do projects, and how little of that money and how little of the benefits redound to people in Kenya and to Kenyan scholars. And I think there's a real agenda that she pointed to on how in public health so much research actually ends up harming people in certain countries, how the agendas themselves are set up without participation or really meaningful engagement in countries, and the benefits of that scientific progress that are produced by research are often not shared. And that's obviously something that we're all aware of now with the COVID vaccine debate. So I'll stop there, but I thought both of those remarks really touched on things that I have found very true in my own experience.
Thank you so much, Alicia. And Chikosa, as the Dean of the Law School in Malawi, and you and I have worked to create the joint program between the Law School, University of Maryland Law School, and Chancellor College in Malawi. How does the course that you co-created that was also, I might add, one of the few courses that went on during the pandemic because it was already online. So that was quite a success story. How does that address the concerns that your law students, Asante and Teoka, brought up? It looks like you're unmuted, Chikosa. Did you hear the question?
No, I suspect you have muted yourself. So that's what I wanted to say.
Oh, good. Perfect. I can hear you perfectly.
Yeah. But I didn't hear your question.
Sorry, my question is, as the co-director of the joint human rights course between University of Maryland Law School and University of Malawi Chancellor College of Law, does that course that you created go some way forward in addressing some of the concerns that Professor Yamin just brought up and your law students, Teoka and Asante, brought up?
Yeah, to some extent, it does attempt to address those concerns. because what the program does is to ensure that students interface with the communities and understand how the law works or operates in practice. Unfortunately, for this year, that did not happen much because of the COVID-19 crisis, but the idea is to make sure that students reorient themselves to the way the law works and to ensure that they understand the law in practice and they understand the law from the perspectives of a different culture. Because I think what we have had as a key challenge, as the students said, is that most of the laws that we have were inherited from colonial masters, and they were assumption laden, in that the assumption was that the systems from the north or from the west were superior, while the traditional systems and processes were inferior. So the way we have been training our students is that we've been training them from that Western-centric perspective. And that has been a major problem, a major challenge. So what we are trying to do now is to allow our students to interface with the communities so that they can understand how the communities work, how the communities resolve their disputes, and how the communities regulate their lives. So what we wanted to do is to get both students from Maryland and Malawi to understand environmental and public health issues from a particular area and a particular community. The idea is for them to understand that communities have their own ways of addressing issues, have their own ways of addressing problems. But what we have so far is like the received law that we received from our colonial master is taken to be the ideal. Whatever developed from within our own communities is looked upon as inferior and can only be tested against what we think is the Western ideal. So in short, I think the interface of the two cultures of our students and the idea of the students engaging with the communities, trying to understand the way communities operate and try to understand legal solutions from the perspective of communities is one way of addressing the problems of colonialism. The idea that communities and African societies have had systems that work. What we have now, as I said, is, for example, if you're talking about public health, if you're talking about law, if you're talking about other systems, we always look upon our systems as inferior and the systems from the West as superior and worth emulating, even where we have systems that work very well and that the West can learn from. And the other idea behind the course that we have been offering is also I think it also addresses some of the issues that the students raised. For example, dealing with the savior mindset, where sometimes institutions in the West look at Africa, for example, as a place that needs help, as a place that can learn from the West. Yes, indeed, we can learn from the West, we can learn from Western systems, but the West also has things to learn from us as Africans. There are certain things that we do better than the West, and there are certain things that we do better, that the West does better than us. So we are talking about a system of mutual learning or a system of mutual dependence instead of a one-way process where the West comes to Africa as saviors and Africans are recipients of Western benevolence. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, and really focusing on that, the value of bidirectional learning. And I realize a single course can't address what is such a deeply rooted problem that really has branches into so many aspects of colonialized society. But I really applaud you for your work in developing that unique class with our law school. And the structures that you talked about, that in a sense you're talking about structures that need to be reflected on and dismantled, is something, Professor Fleming, that your student Danielle really poignantly referred to in her comments. So I wanted to move to you and ask what really stood out to you, and what are some paths forward for either the PA profession or generally for the university.
Thank you, Virginia, for the question, and thank you for the invitation to be a part of this amazing summit. So I love the focus on these short-term experiences in global health. So I want to make sure that I use the appropriate terminology, and the self-reflection that Danielle was able to really share with everyone. And a couple of points around that. I thought it was interesting, the intentionality around having that conversation, because I think that oftentimes self-reflection doesn't necessarily happen on its own, and creating this space. And so kudos to you all for creating this space for these students to be able to have that self-reflection, to be able to ask those questions and to be able to come to that conclusion. So I'm really appreciative of that. And really, I think that as we move towards solutions, really having more intentional spaces for self-reflection, I think is going to be key. As I sat here and I was also reflecting on those statements, it really brought back this notion of how systems and structure create the products that they are intended to create. And I felt, when I'm thinking about sitting on admissions committees and having these PA students come in, and how folks really get extra points or a leg up, right, for having these short-term experiences in global health, and how we really are just perpetuating a lot of these sort of, these sort of false narratives, and actually giving more credit and to the same structure. So it's a really fascinating example of how the system is, perpetuating the thing that we're really trying to dismantle, and the notion of these short-term experiences and who has access to them. Our profession, as well as many other professions, is a predominantly white profession, so about 88% white. And thinking about folks who have access to these short-term experiences and the social capital that are afforded to many of these students, and how that's also really continuing to create that gap that we're seeing within our profession. And Danielle did a really great job as far as thinking about sort of hierarchy of professions when talking about the Maryland Board of Physicians and how, as PAs, so we're physician assistants, but yesterday we had a name change to physician associates, so PAs. How PAs, we really are a critical member of the healthcare team, and have continued to have to fight for, our role within this hierarchy. And that is true, but what is also true, and so that's sort of an externally facing fight. But what's also true is, I think as a profession, we really don't do a lot of reflection internally on the hierarchies that are set up, and how our profession is so incredibly white, and across health professions is so incredibly white, and still centering, really sort of that white as the center of a lot of what based on our academic medicine and how we're actually practicing medicine. So I think that there are opportunities for us to also do some internal reflection and some critical appraisal of ourselves and of our profession, the same way that we are able to sort of externally critically evaluate our profession. So those were just some of the thoughts from that brief experience.
I appreciate what you're saying so much, and it really follows up on Dr. Benoit's earlier comments during the keynote that global health is everywhere, and we have to really look at our assumptions internally, externally here, and how they relate to our work overseas with our international partners. And I think you really teed off a great point talking about the short-term experiences in global health, because I want to turn to Jody Olsen, who in her role as director of the Peace Corps has really focuses on really long-term, deep experiences around the world, and focusing on developing that relationship and trust. And so I wanted to move it over to you, Jody, and ask what stood out to you from the students' presentations.
A lot. It was very exciting to see. And I wanted to pick up on Lindsay's phrase of the decolonization of the mind. I'd never heard that before. And to me, it's where it begins to come at where this conversation is. And Chikosa, thank you for your comments, because I felt that your law example illustrated that really well. What I've heard from the sessions, from the students talking so far, are, I wanted to name 4 words that we all know well, but are we really using them? One is language, and really in the first presentation, such an emphasis on languages that go beyond English and French, or Spanish or Portuguese, into the languages that people speak. Because it's in the languages that people speak one learns what is a culture, what is history, what is tradition. Second, a theme that ran across for me was listening. But it's not just listening, it's listening and hearing and internalizing what the other person has said and what am I taking away from this conversation. Third, we all appreciated communicate, communicate, communicate. And Dr. So probably said that 10 times, and I clapped every time he said that, because we cannot communicate enough. And the humbleness that has to come with that communication and with that listening. I wanted to give a particular example, and if there's time, I can give a couple of others. But as Virginia noted earlier, Peace Corps has been online for the last 14, 15 months. And online meant that we had to bring 7,000 Peace Corps volunteers home, doing it from our bedrooms and living rooms and dining rooms, which was quite an experience. But there's an element in this I wanted to mention, that we came together in a way that we had never come together before, that began to equalize the conversations and taking it away from the North and the South, or the East and the West. For the first time, we had our Peace Corps medical officers, all of whom were doctors, all of whom belong to the countries in which they serve, come together with the doctors in the United States. And over the months, as we were trying to address COVID and those issues, we got to know the doctor, the culture he represented or she represented, how they approached COVID in that country in a way that we had never thought of before, because in that nobody was quite right and nobody was quite wrong. We had to be who we were for the citizens of the country, for the volunteers, and for the staff. And what that did was reframe collectively all our thinking, because it would be the Peace Corps medical officer in South Africa that the medical officer in Cambodia would pick up and say, oh my heavens, how phenomenal. And the change in the team in the United States, in our office, changed from what we heard from Mongolia, who approached COVID much more aggressively than any of our other countries. Why? How? What was the background for that? We had to listen, we had to hear it. And what that did was, as we worked in different kinds of small groups, it wasn't the Americans talking to everybody else. It was everybody talking to everybody. And knowing informally who we were for the first time made it easier for us to have the kind of decision-making and processes. So taking from that one particular example to generalize it a bit, as several of you have mentioned about how you have a faculty person from one country working in a class of another. We all dislike Zoom. I got rather tired of it after a year, but we're all good at it. I want to give reaffirm the importance of the way that we can communicate now over a period of time to get past the countries, get past the languages, into the actual cultures, so that we're hearing them equally and we can learn from each other equally in a way that we tend to think of us's and them's. This last year at Peace Corps, there were no us's and them's. There couldn't be any, because it was the only way we could survive, was to hear everyone equally in solving the problem. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Jody. And it really, you are reflecting back what Dean Banda said about the course and the value of really learning from each other. And I know, to go to you, Alicia, you talked about recently getting another degree from the University of Buenos Aires, and how that experience studying in a different language in a different type of university was very important for you. And I think we're all gathering here as students and educators around what a university can do to decolonize global education, global health education. Can you share some thoughts from that experience about the role of learning in decolonizing the mind?
Sure, I can share some thoughts on that experience. I share Jody's view of the importance of decolonizing the mind. I think originally that was Frantz Fanon's phrase, which is the most important thing that. And I guess actually before I answer that question, I want to say a couple of other things from the first round. One is that I'm very fortunate that I work at a global health and social justice organization called Partners in Health. We have a philosophy grounded in decolonization. We have an approach called One PIH, where all of the different sites are part of the Leadership Council. We have COVID-19 daily briefings where we share information and strategies, both on the latest scientific information as well as the ground up information all the time. And that changes the entire ethos of the organization. So I'm happy to talk about that more in another question. In response to this particular question, I'm happy to talk about Buenos Aires, which is a model of public education, fantastic public education in the country of Argentina, with all of the challenges of funding, et cetera. But it brings up, more than my personal experience now, it brings up a question which I think is worth considering as you go forward with this, which is there is not a global North and a global South, right? There are many, many different kinds of communities and countries, and within Latin America, Argentina is entirely different from Colombia, Mexico, the Central American countries. In sub-Saharan Africa, you know, what is going on? I mean, I lived in East Africa, so I can say, like, if you actually know the countries, Kenya is very, very, very different from Tanzania. And you would say, oh, it's just East Africa. It's not just East Africa. So, you know, I think that it would be, it's very important to kind of break down that dichotomy, because by using the dichotomy, it actually reinforces colonialism. Yeah, in terms of learning from Argentina, I think one of the things that I learned, and I have family in Argentina, I've grown up between South America and North America, is, you know, how much still our education in the global North takes for granted and privileges a certain category of expertise, and how much, as has been said, language creates a kind of hierarchy in terms of what defines the field and what is cited and treated as you know, the knowledge, as Chikosa said, that the ideal, the things to be cited, and that has a self-reinforcing cycle of people who want to publish, refer to this paper, refer to that, and it just reinforces itself. And I think we need to break that down.
Thank you. I'm looking at the time and I don't know where it's gone, and we need to have these conversations. Let's consider this just a start of a really important and long self-investigation and reflection. And so can I ask first Chikosa and then and Shani, Chikosa, do you have any final thoughts about a path forward in this area from your experience as the Dean of the Law School in Malawi? Chikosa, did you hear the question? We may have some.
Oh, he's on mute.
Yeah, Chikosa, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry, let me just unmute. In terms of the way forward, as an institution, we are now in transition, and because we have become a new university, we have linked other colleges. But apart from that, we are undergoing a process of curriculum review. I think it's an opportunity for us to rethink what we teach and how we teach what we teach, and what material do we expose our students to. So I guess that's where international collaboration would be very helpful as well for both institutions. If we look at what we do, we have been training lawyers mostly to serve the elites or to serve the rich, because those are the ones that can afford. So now the issue is we are in a paradigm shift where we're saying, why don't we educate lawyers for social justice? And how do we ensure that our students understand the context in which we're operating a little more? One major challenge we have as a university is our catchment area, because most of the students that tend to be selected to law school tend to be those from either elite or maybe, let me say, middle-class families who essentially already have a colonized or a colonial mindset. And now that's where the challenge comes in. How do we ensure that the students that we train are fit to work within the context in which they are working? For example, I think Teuka talked about language and the idea that we should serve the communities, or the community that we are serving better. So my view is that we need to pay attention to the content and substance of what we teach, and then to the pedagogy or the methods that we use. And I think the Malawi-Maryland collaboration provides that useful link. How I wish we went back slightly to what we used to do before, where I would get the students to live within communities or to live close to the communities, and then we would not just get law students to get into there. We would get social work students, pharma students, and others. So the idea of introducing international collaboration and interdisciplinarity. So the idea is to demystify some of the dominant understanding that we have, and then to ensure that students understand the legal systems or healthcare systems from the perspective of the community that they will potentially serve. So that's basically what we think. I think we need to start with curriculum review and to review the way we teach and how we deliver our courses, and then to also look at potential advocacy for the reform of some of the laws that we have. For example, we have a Public Health Act that was passed in 1948. It was there to save the colonial master. We are still keeping it. And the COVID-19 crisis revealed that it's not fit for purpose. So the idea is, how do we address these issues. We look at the substance of the law, the substance of what we teach, and how we teach. So I thought that future collaboration should focus on that, plus generating information that we use. So research is a key issue that we need to work on a little more, because we cannot talk about decolonization if the information that we use, or the information that we expose our students to, is the same information that has been informed by colonialism as well. So we need to come up with a system that addresses the issue holistically, as opposed to just looking at it from one particular perspective. So in short, our teaching, our research, our community engagement itself need to be decolonized as well. Even for our students, they should not be going to communities as saviors. They should go to the communities as collaborators. They collaborate with the communities to find lasting solutions to problems that communities face. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chikosa, for raising the important issues of interdisciplinarity, of contextualizing laws for the community. And I'm really struggling with the time. I hope for the rest of our panelists, we'll stay engaged in some other ways, because I want to turn it over to the Chancellor of the University of Maryland System, Dr. Jay Perman, who used to be the